Her true story from Louisiana. My adopted son said, "You eat and sleep, that's all you do." So I quietly left and sold the cabin he thought was his. They called me lazy. I called the realtor. "You are a leech," he spat. "A parasite. You have no idea how exhausting it is to carry you. You're lucky we even let you stay here. You eat and sleep, that's all you do," he shouted, voice rising with every word. "You sit around all day in that chair, acting like the queen of this place, while I work, I fix, I pay for everything." "Mother," he said, mocking now, "do you even realize how useless you are? How pathetic? You sit here like some relic while the rest of us live real lives. It's disgusting." The smell of cornbread still lingered in the air when the shouting started. It was supposed to be a warm night, family dinner, gumbo on the stove, candles flickering along the old oak table I had sanded down with my own hands, back when my joints still worked right. My adopted son had invited some friends from town. His wife had set the table with paper napkins and those cheap plates she bought online, and the baby had been giggling all afternoon. For a moment, it felt like the kind of evening worth holding on to, until I forgot to boil the water for the sweet tea. It was a small thing, a pot left untouched on the back burner while I rocked the baby. I had meant to get back to it, but the little one had fallen asleep on my shoulder, and I lost track of time. It was not the first time I had forgotten something, but it was the first time he lost all patience. "Seriously," he snapped, tossing his napkin down as though I had committed a crime. "We're all just supposed to sit here and wait again because you can't keep up with one damn thing?" The table went silent. His wife looked at me, then back at him. Their friends stared down into their plates, pretending to be fascinated by coleslaw. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I'll fix it now." He stood up, pushing his chair back hard enough to rattle the floor. "No, don't bother. You'll just burn it or forget again, like everything else." I didn't respond. My hands were already trembling. Not from fear, but from age, from arthritis, from all the things that don't come with a warning but settle in your bones like bad weather. "You eat and sleep, that's all you do," he shouted, voice rising with every word. "You sit around all day in that chair, acting like the queen of this place, while I work, I fix, I pay for everything." "That's not true," I said, barely above a whisper. "Oh, really?" He threw his arms up. "You think scrubbing a few dishes and telling stories from 50 years ago is the same as contributing? You think sitting in your chair like a piece of furniture while the rest of us hustle around you is help?" I could feel the others watching, weighing whether to say something or stay quiet. They stayed quiet. "I cook," I murmured, though I hated myself the second I said it. He laughed, harsh and cold. "You call what you do cooking? We redo everything after you touch it. My wife's the one who actually keeps this place running." She looked at him then, a flicker of embarrassment crossing her face, but she said nothing. "You are a leech," he spat. "A parasite. You have no idea how exhausting it is to carry you. You're lucky we even let you stay here." His words dropped like rocks in water, pulling the air out of the room. I looked down at my hands. They were weathered, knotted. Hands that had once built things, sewn quilts, held feverish children through long nights, dug gardens and lifted groceries and patched clothes. Hands that had held his the day I brought him home from the shelter. His little fingers gripping mine like they knew they had found safety. I looked back up at him and felt nothing. Not sorrow, not rage, just a hollow kind of knowing, as if a final curtain had dropped and what was behind it was never mine to begin with. "Mother," he said, mocking now, "do you even realize how useless you are? How pathetic? You sit here like some relic while the rest of us live real lives. It's disgusting." My mouth opened, but I did not speak. What was there to say? He believed every word he said, and maybe, just maybe, he always had. I looked at the food on the table. The gumbo I had stirred with a wooden spoon, older than his marriage. The cornbread recipe passed down from my own grandmother. Baked in the cast iron skillet I never let anyone wash but me. The napkins folded just so, like I used to do on Sunday mornings when I taught manners to children who had none at home. He thought I was useless, that I did nothing, that I was nothing. "Are you done?" I asked softly. He blinked, caught off guard. "I just want to know if you're done shouting in front of your friends, because the cornbread's gonna get cold." He opened his mouth to say something else, then closed it again. Maybe it was the way I looked at him. Maybe it was the way I stopped shaking. I stood up slowly. My chair creaked, my knees ached. But I stood tall. I did not cry. I did not argue. I looked around the table, at all the faces that refused to meet mine. Then I turned to him and said, "Thank you for your honesty." He rolled his eyes, but I meant it, because now I knew what he saw me as, knew what I had become in his eyes. And once you know that, you can stop pretending. I picked up my plate, walked it to the sink, rinsed it, dried it, put it away. Then I walked past him, past the table, past the room full of silence, and I went to bed. Not because I was tired, but because I had work to do in the morning. Real work, the kind that would change everything. Long before that dinner, before the shouting and the shaking hands, before he grew into a man who forgot how he arrived at my door, I was just a woman with a broken heart and a dream no one thought she could afford. My husband died young. A stroke, sudden and merciless, took him one summer morning while he was fixing the porch steps. One second he was muttering about the warped wood, the next he was crumpled on the ground with a coffee cup still half full beside him. We had no children, no real savings, and no backup plan. Just each other. And then, just me. I kept going because I had to. There was no time for grief when bills kept arriving. I took a job teaching 3rd grade at the local elementary school, a place where chalk dust and scraped knees became my daily routine. I taught multiplication tables, spelling drills, and how to tie shoes with bunny ears. I smiled through parent-teacher conferences, wrote lesson plans late into the night, and corrected grammar with the same care a surgeon gives to open heart. But when the sun went down, I switched roles. My second shift began at the loom. I had learned weaving from my grandmother, a woman who spun magic from thread in a tiny kitchen behind the cane fields. I revived her patterns and sold table runners and wall hangings at craft fairs and farmers markets. Every dollar I made from weaving went into a tin box I kept hidden beneath the floorboards of our old duplex. $1 here, 5 there, until years later, it became enough for land. It was just an acre and a half of rocky soil and pine needles outside Shreveport. No plumbing, no power. But when I first stood on that hill and watched the morning fog rise from the trees, I felt something stir in me that had been silent for years. Hope. With my savings, I hired 2 young men from church to help cut trees. They used handsaws and calloused palms, while I brought lemonade and hammered nails with all the strength arthritis would allow. The cabin came together slowly, one beam at a time, one wall against the wind. I was there for every plank laid, every window fitted, every coat of sealant that kept the rain out. I chose the wood-burning stove myself, stained the porch railings with a brush that kept slipping from my fingers. I even laid the stone path from the front steps to the little garden where rosemary and wild mint grew without permission. That cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was proof that a woman left alone could still build something solid, something permanent. And then came the storm. Hurricane Katrina tore through Louisiana like a scream. I remember watching the news and thinking, "Dear God, help them." I could have stayed home, stayed safe, but I did not. I packed blankets, food, old coats, and drove south with the volunteer crew from our church. We ended up at an emergency shelter in Baton Rouge, full of people too stunned to speak and children too scared to cry. That is where I saw him. He was 7 years old, sitting alone in a corner with his knees pulled to his chest and a stuffed bear soaked from the rain clutched tight against his ribs. His clothes were too big, his eyes too quiet, and there was no one calling his name. I asked around. No one knew whose he was. Someone thought he had come in on a bus from New Orleans, alone. The paperwork was a mess. The volunteers were overwhelmed. I sat beside him, slowly, and asked his name. He whispered it. I asked where his parents were. He didn't answer. Just pulled the bear closer and stared at the ground. Something in my chest cracked open. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was just that I had space in my car and room in my heart. But I brought him home. At first, it was temporary. That's what I told myself. A few weeks until the system figured things out, until the paperwork caught up. But weeks became months. The paperwork never came. And one day he called me Mama. That was the only permission I needed. I adopted him legally a year later. The judge asked me if I understood the responsibility. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I gave him my last name, enrolled him in school, sewed his Halloween costumes, saved for his braces, put a star beside his art on the fridge, cried behind the door when he had nightmares, and held his hand when he scraped his knee falling off the porch I built. He loved the cabin, called it our house, ran barefoot across the floor I had sanded, built pillow forts in the living room, hung string lights across the front porch for Christmas every year, even when we could only afford one string. It was never meant to be just mine anymore. It was his too, or so I thought. But years change people. The little boy with the bear turned into a man with demands. The quiet child became someone who rolled his eyes when I spoke, who forgot the sacrifices, the nights I stayed up with fevered skin pressed to mine, the way I fought the world to give him a place to feel safe. He forgot the roots of the home he stood in, but I never did, because that cabin was not just wood and nails. It was my life, and one day it would be his undoing. He came back on a Sunday afternoon, just as the magnolia trees were blooming and the breeze off the hills smelled like rain. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea when I heard the crunch of gravel under tires. The sound made my heart leap in a way I had not felt in years. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my apron, and there he was, my boy, now a grown man, stepping out of a beat-up SUV with his wife beside him and a baby in the back seat, blinking against the sun. "Hey, Mama," he said, smiling like he meant it. "We're home." Home. That word tasted sweet, even as I swallowed the tears building in my throat. He hugged me like he remembered how I held him during storms. His wife gave me a polite nod. The baby, round-cheeked and soft, reached for my necklace with chubby fingers. "We were thinking," he said after the suitcases were inside, "it might be good to stay a while, help you around here, maybe take some pressure off." "Of course," I said without a second's pause. "This cabin's as much yours as mine." That night, I made shrimp étouffée from scratch and baked biscuits with the last of the good flour. We sat around the old table and laughed. He called me the best cook in the parish. His wife smiled, tired but civil. The baby cooed between spoonfuls of mashed sweet potatoes. After they went to bed, I stood in the kitchen, hands resting on the counter, heart warm. I had thought my days of caring for others were over, but here they were, my family, under my roof again. The next morning, I got up early to clean out the spare room, washed the sheets, wiped the windows, bought a new mattress with my savings because the old one sagged too much. I drove into town to pick up fresh fruit and cereal I knew the baby would eat, rearranged the pantry to make space for their things, moved the rocking chair into the living room so his wife could nurse in comfort, even cleared the backyard, pulled weeds, trimmed branches, and set up an old swing for the little one. Those first few weeks were golden. He called me Mama again, the way he used to when he needed help tying his shoes. Every evening he thanked me for dinner, told me I was the glue that held everything together. On Sundays, he brought me flowers from the farmer's market and kissed my forehead before leaving for errands. For the first time in a long time, I felt needed again, not as a burden, but as a blessing. But slowly, the gold started to dull. The thanks came less often. Then, not at all. The dishes I cooked were suddenly too salty or too soft. The baby's schedule became sacred, and I was warned not to wake him, even by accident. My footsteps were too loud. My soap smelled too old. The towels I folded weren't fluffy enough. One night, while clearing the table, I overheard his wife on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was sharp, tired. "No, she's not like your mom," she said to someone. "She's old school. She hovers. She doesn't get boundaries. She just sits around waiting for someone to need her. I mean, I'm grateful, but it's a lot." I paused, a spoon still in my hand. "She's not like modern grandmas," she added. "She doesn't help with money, doesn't drive, just there. I don't want my baby growing up thinking that's normal." I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. The next day, I smiled as usual, washed her tea mug, folded her laundry, moved my chair to the far side of the living room so she could have more space with the baby. My son no longer called me the glue. He came home later, ate in silence, answered my questions with nods. When I asked how work was going, he said fine. When I asked if he needed anything, he said, "We're good." Still, I told myself it was enough. This is the cost of closeness, I thought. This is the price of family. Love them, serve them, accept the quiet when the gratitude runs dry. I believed that, for a while, until the day the quiet turned into something else, something sharper, something that would cut deeper than I ever expected. It started with a blanket, a soft yellow one I had crocheted myself during long evenings by the fire. I used it to keep the baby warm during his naps on the porch, where the breeze helped him sleep better. One afternoon I forgot to bring it back inside. The sun had dipped low before I noticed. When I reached for it, my daughter-in-law was already there, holding it between two fingers like it was garbage. "It's ruined," she said, frowning. "Smells like mildew and dust. You can't just leave things out like that. Not everything here is replaceable." I apologized, quietly, folded the blanket anyway, and took it to my room, holding it close for a moment before placing it at the bottom of the linen drawer. The next morning, a new device sat humming in the hallway. A large, sleek air purifier with blinking lights and a digital screen. I thought nothing of it until I caught my son glancing toward me as he plugged it in. "It's for the baby," he muttered. "The cabin holds in smells. We're just trying to keep the air clean." His wife chimed in from the kitchen. "Yeah, I mean, it's that old mix of cigarette and wood, kind of stale. It's no one's fault, just years of buildup." No one said my name, but the implication hung in the air thicker than any smoke. I nodded. I always nodded. That week, I noticed small shifts in routine. At first they were subtle. The dining table was suddenly too cramped with the high chair and serving dishes, so I was kindly offered a tray and encouraged to eat in the kitchen. "It's more peaceful there," my son said. "Less noise, more space for the baby." So I sat alone, my back to the hum of the refrigerator, my meal cooling faster than my tea. When they had guests over, a couple from his office, a neighbor they were trying to impress, I was told, gently at first, "You don't have to join us. Just take it easy tonight." Then it became firmer. "We're having a late night. Probably best if you stay in your room." My room, the back corner of the cabin I built with my bare hands, the room where I once laid him down, feverish and sweating, as a child too scared to sleep alone. I listened from behind the closed door as they laughed and toasted wine glasses, played soft jazz from the Bluetooth speaker, and talked about travel plans and startups and new school philosophies. I pressed my ear to the wood and caught phrases like modern parenting and old world guilt. One evening, as I was folding laundry, I heard her on the phone. "No, it's still in her name," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "I know. Believe me, I've tried. She's not mean about it, but everything in this place still has her fingerprints, her rules. It's like living in a museum." I stopped folding. "If it were up to me," she continued, "we'd just put it on the market and start fresh. But as long as she's here, we have to tolerate certain things. Honestly, I just wish the place was in our name already. Then we wouldn't have to play nice." I stood there, holding a towel in my hands, letting the weight of those words sink through my skin like needles. They were waiting for me to die or disappear, waiting for the deed to fall into their hands, waiting for the day when they no longer had to play nice. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the nails I had hammered in place, the windows I had washed until they sparkled, the years I had filled with lullabies and cornbread and hot tea on cold mornings. They thought I was a guest in their future, but I was the one who had built their past, and I never forgot a single word they said. I did not sleep that night. After the shouting at dinner, after his voice sliced through the room like a blade, after the others stared at their plates while I tried not to cry into mine, I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my apron, hands resting in my lap. The cabin was silent, but inside me, everything was loud. I replayed his words over and over. "You're a leech. Pathetic. You sit here like some relic while the rest of us live real lives." I looked around the room, the same four walls I had painted myself, the curtains I had sewn by hand, the wooden floor still stained where he'd spilled grape juice when he was 8. This was not just a room. This was a life I had built from nothing. And now I was being asked to shrink within it, to disappear. So I decided to leave, not loudly, not with tears, just leave. At midnight, I pulled out an old backpack from the top shelf of the closet. Inside it, I placed my medicine, labeled, sorted, with the dates written in my own handwriting. The deed to the cabin, still in my name after all these years, folded neatly in a plastic sleeve. A letter my husband wrote me 2 decades ago, just before he passed. A letter I read every year on our anniversary. One that ended with, If the world forgets your worth, make sure you remember it. And finally, a small bank book from a credit union in town. My private account. Never touched, never mentioned. A quiet cushion built over the years from my weaving money. Birthday checks I never cashed, and teaching stipends I tucked away for a rainy day. Well, the storm had come. By 3:30 am, I was dressed, hair combed, teeth brushed. I sat one last time in my old armchair, drinking lukewarm coffee and staring at the fireplace. I didn't light it. I wanted to remember the cabin just as it was. At 4 o'clock am, I opened the front door slowly, careful not to let it creak, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The stars were still out, blinking like quiet witnesses. I walked down the dirt path I had cleared with my own hands 20 years ago. Past the swing, where my grandson had once laughed. Past the garden bed now overtaken by weeds. The nearest bus stop was 2 miles away, but my legs carried me steady. Every step was a goodbye I did not say out loud. When I reached the corner of Route 47, I pulled out my old flip phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Hello," a groggy voice answered. "June," I said calmly. "It's me," she paused. Then, "Well, I'll be. I thought you dropped off the face of the earth. I need to sell the cabin," I said. Silence. "Right now? This week?" Another pause. "You sure?" I looked up at the sky. I've never been surer of anything in my life. June was my old colleague from the school district, now a successful realtor in Baton Rouge. She knew the value of land in the hills, knew how to move fast when needed, and more importantly, she knew me. "I can draw up the listing by noon," she said. "You just tell me where to send the papers." "I'll be in town by then," I replied. "At the bus station." "I'll wait." And I did. Because when a woman builds something with her own hands, she never truly lets it go. She just decides who deserves it next. The news broke faster than I expected. By the time I had signed the papers and handed the keys to June, the for sale sign had barely settled in the red clay before he came storming into town, rage in his eyes and panic in his breath. He called. I didn't answer. He messaged. I didn't read. But I knew it was coming. The moment he'd realize everything he assumed was his, never. 3 days after the listing went live, he found me. I was sitting on a bench outside the little Methodist church, sipping sweet tea from a foam cup. He drove up like a dust storm, door flung open, shoes scraping the pavement as he marched toward me. "Mama," he said, his voice tight and breaking. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me the listing's wrong. Tell me you didn't sell the cabin." I looked up at him slowly. The boy I raised now stood before me, a man unrecognizable. "I didn't sell it," I said calmly. "Not yet. I signed the papers. The sale closes Friday." His face crumpled like a paper bag. You can't," he stammered. "That's our home. My home. The baby's crib is still in there. My whole life is in that cabin." I looked down at my tea, took a sip. He dropped to his knees, right there on the sidewalk, in front of a church we never went to, in a town he barely knew. "Mama, please," he whispered. "Please, you're my mother. You raised me. You loved me. You can't just throw me out like this. I'll do better. I'll take care of you, I swear. Oh, don't take the house. Don't sell it." I watched him cry, not for me, but for the roof he thought he had secured through proximity. Then he said it. "Make a new will, please. Just put it in my name. If you love me, just do that." It was then I spoke the words I had held for years. "You're not my blood." He looked up, stunned. "You're not my son by birth," I said. "I found you in a shelter after Katrina. You were holding a soaked teddy bear, and no one came looking for you. I took you home because you needed someone, not because I owed you anything." He shook his head slowly, his mouth open, but no words came. "I loved you like a mother," I continued, "and I don't regret that, not a day. But love doesn't mean debt. And it doesn't mean silence while I'm insulted in my own home." His lips trembled. "Mama, no," I said, standing now. "You called me lazy, said I was a burden, sat by while your wife mocked the way I smell, the way I walk, the way I live. You tried to erase me while standing on the floor I built." "I didn't mean it," he whispered. "Yes, you did," I said, without anger. "And that's what makes it worse." He stayed kneeling as I walked past him, slow but steady. I didn't owe him a home. I had already given him a life. He cried, right there on the sidewalk, as if the pavement might swallow his shame. But no one came to rescue him. not even the God whose house we stood in front of. After I walked away, I heard from June that he'd tried to contact the buyer, begged for a second chance, claimed there had been a misunderstanding and that the property belonged to his family. She showed him the deed, the name etched in black ink that had never changed in over 20 years. No amendments, no co-signers, no surprises, just the truth he had ignored for so long, finally staring him in the face. He went home to what was still, for a few more days, the cabin. His wife exploded when he told her, accused him of being a fool, of not locking things down years ago. She ranted about promises, about sacrifices, about how she never would have moved there if she knew it was temporary. They may lie to themselves, June told me, made a whole life on land that wasn't theirs. Meanwhile, I was already settling into my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom unit above a florist's shop, just 3 blocks from the town library. The window overlooked a little garden where butterflies came every morning. The furniture was second-hand, the kettle a little dented, but the piece, that was brand new. No doors slammed here. No one muttered under their breath when I forgot something. No one rolled their eyes when my joints creaked or when I asked to hear a story twice. Here, I could just be a person, not a burden. A week after the sale closed, he received an envelope by mail, official, unfeeling, notarized. Notice to vacate within 30 days. He called that night, 4 times. I watched the phone light up on my bedside table and let it ring. He sent texts. Please, Mama, pick up, please. We're scared. Where are we supposed to go? I'll do better. I'll change. I swear I will. I'll take care of you. Like I should have before. I read them once, then turned off the phone. Not because I hated him, but because I had already given him every word I ever owed him. Silence at that point was the only thing left with weight. They stayed in the cabin until the very last hour, packed in a panic, left dents in the walls, scuff marks on the floor. June said when she arrived with the new owners, the place felt hollow, not from being empty, but from having never been truly appreciated. He looked like a ghost, she told me, like a man trying to climb out of a grave he dug himself. I didn't ask for more. I didn't want revenge, just quiet, and quiet, at last I had. I mailed it on a Wednesday, a simple envelope, no return address, handwritten on a square of parchment I had saved from a stationery set my husband gave me the year before he died. Inside was just a folded note, no signature, no lecture, no emotion, just the truth. You said I was useless. Now you'll have to find somewhere more valuable to live. I addressed it to the old cabin, knowing they'd be long gone by the time it arrived. That was the point. The message wasn't meant to be read with witnesses. It was for a moment when the echo finally settled, when their shouting had stopped and the empty room spoke louder than I ever did. Let them open it in silence. Let the silence explain what I no longer needed to say. That morning, I brewed myself a cup of black tea, strong, with a touch of honey. The old kettle hissed just the way I liked. I sat by the window of my new apartment, curtains open, birds darting between flower boxes, the distant hum of a sleepy town below me. In my lap was the letter, the one from my husband. It was written on lined paper, creased at the corners, faded just enough to carry the weight of time. I had kept it in a velvet pouch at the back of my drawer, alongside baby pictures and receipts for things that no longer mattered. If you're tired, let go. You are not meant to carry someone else's life forever. He had written that the year before he passed, after he got sick, when he started noticing how my smile faded in the shadow of obligation. He saw me then, really saw me, even when I was pretending to be stronger than I was. For years, I ignored his words. I told myself love meant endurance, that motherhood, real or chosen, was a vow that could not break. But there comes a time when endurance becomes erasure, and I had disappeared long enough. So I read his letter again, folded it neatly, placed it in the center of the table, beside my tea and a plate of toast with plum jam. Then I picked up my fork. It was a simple breakfast. No fancy dishes, no baby crying in the background, no insults. No reminders of all the ways I did not measure up. And for the first time in 30 years, I ate without apology. I ate without shame. I ate without feeling like a burden. No one sighed when I took my time. No one criticized the way I buttered my toast. No one asked me to make myself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient. The quiet was not lonely. It was freedom. And as I sipped the last of my tea, I looked out at the clouds stretching over the rooftops and whispered to no one in particular, "This is mine, not the building, not the view, but the peace I built from broken wood and stolen time, the peace I chose, finally, after all these years of choosing everyone else." And in that little kitchen, with the sun catching the edge of my saucer, I did not cry. I did not miss them. I did not wish they had stayed, only wished I had left sooner. If you've stayed with me till the end, thank you. This wasn't a tale spun for drama. It wasn't something crafted out of fiction or made to fit neatly inside a headline. This was a memory, a truth, one of those deep, slow truths that lives in the bones long after the bruises fade. You see, people think silence means surrender, that if we're quiet we must be weak, that if we forgive it means we'll forget. But no, silence is where we gather our strength. And forgiveness? Forgiveness is just what we do for ourselves before we shut the door. I didn't leave that cabin to hurt anyone. I left because I had finally seen the writing on the walls I'd built, because the hands that once reached for me with love had turned into fists of judgment, because the very people I sheltered thought the roof over their head was owed to them, simply because I was old enough to give it. But no one ever asks how that roof got built. No one sees the hours we spent weaving our hearts into homes. They don't see the blistered palms, the sleepless nights, the nights we ate less so they could eat more. They only see us now, slow, quiet, sitting in chairs that creak louder than our voices. They forget we were once the storm. They forget who paid the mortgage, who carried them, fed them, clothed them, kissed their bruises and held their shame. And when we stop being useful, they write us off. They call us lazy, a burden, in my case, a leech. But here's what they don't know, and what I hope you never forget. We don't owe them our silence. We don't owe them our names on paper. And we sure as hell don't owe them the roof over their head if they've spent years tearing it down from the inside. I walked away, not because I was weak. I walked away because I was finally strong enough to see the truth for what it was and let it go. And child, let me tell you, the peace on the other side of goodbye is sweeter than any apology that never comes. Now I live in a small place, nothing grand, just a kitchen where my tea boils the way I like, a window that lets in the morning, and a bed that doesn't feel cold when I climb in alone. But I sleep without insult, I eat without shame, and I wake up every day knowing I do not have to prove my worth to anyone, not a son, not a neighbor, not even the woman in the mirror. I'm enough, and so are you. If you've ever been the quiet one in the room, if you've ever been dismissed as just a grandmother, just a housewife, just a woman whose time has passed, let me be the one to tell you, your story matters. Your memory matters. And revenge, my dear? Revenge doesn't have to come with screaming. Sometimes it sounds like a phone call to a realtor, like keys on a table, like a note that simply says you'll have to find somewhere more valuable to live. That's why I tell these stories, not for pity, not for attention, but for clarity, so that one woman listening, maybe it's you, will finally feel seen. Because too many of us have swallowed our stories for decades. Too many have held our pain in our pockets while we set the table for those who never once said thank you. Well, not anymore. You've heard my truth. Now it's time for you to stand in yours. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you think of someone or made you feel something that's hard to name, then I ask you to do just one thing. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Not for me, for you. Because this is where we speak the words we were never allowed to say. This is where silence ends. Where memories become maps. Where justice isn't loud, it's inevitable. So go ahead and tap that button, child. Because I've got more stories to tell. Some will break your heart. Some will piece it back together. And all of them will remind you, a grandma may sit quiet in the corner, but when she finally speaks, the world listens. Until next time, sugar, be good to yourself, and never mistake kindness for weakness.